Welcome to the American Soybean Association stage. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Meghan Grebner. With me this afternoon, Dave Walton from Iowa, Nick Moody from Virginia. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Sure, pleasure to be here.
Before we get started, Nick, why don't you tell us a little bit about your farm?
We farm in southern Virginia, mostly bean, corn, and wheat operation with a little bit of cattle, and farm a little bit with my dad, and a little bit in the Chesapeake Bay and a little bit out of the Chesapeake Bay, and mostly no-till cover crops, and about a 1,500 acre farm, give or take. So that's fine.
Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about yours?
Sure, we're located in east central Iowa. We raise soybeans, corn, beef cattle, and a few sheep, mainly cow-calf, but we do feedlot also. It's a multi-generational farm, so we took over from my dad, who's now retired. Got my oldest son that's working back into the operation, and so he's my backup when I'm here. So it's great to have him along.
It's nice to have those extra hands to get all the things done and do what you do so well, which is represent American soybean farmers.
Yep, absolutely. We couldn't do it without him.
All right, today as we wrap up today, you guys get probably one of the biggest topics and stories that I hear and concerns that I hear from farmers around the country right now, and that's supply chain issues. So at first blush, when I say supply chain issues, Nick, what comes to mind?
Oh, right now, instability, and really, got to be on your toes. We're running into issues about getting inputs and different supplies and parts. So as a farmer right now, we really have to be flexible and versatile, because there's dealing with a few challenges, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Dave?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. We saw this as sort of a slow creep. But last year it was parts availability and some equipment issues, but we got inputs okay, but it kind of woke you up to the fact that there's going to be some supply chain issues going forward. So, we tried to be a little bit more aggressive in getting chemicals and seed and fertilizer booked this year to try to assure supply, but it's going to be a critical issue for us.
Let's talk a little bit about input prices. I have a couple of notes. I think as you look at planning, we're talking about higher commodity prices, right? Like that's a benefit, but at the same time, you're also facing rising input costs. Nick, how do you prep yourself for the volatility and instability that you're seeing in the market?
Like I said, lately we've had to run our numbers, run them again, and really see where readjust our return on inputs for different inputs that we're using. We're trying a couple different we're trying a couple different things, different style inputs, different chemicals, and trying to prep and kind of do like that. So.
Dave?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. We've had to make sure that pencil stays sharp, and we're looking at the input side, the output side, that the crop price helps make up for it. But from last fall to this spring, I've talked to retailers, and anhydrous has gone up 275%. Our dry fertilizer inputs, our P&K, have more than doubled. So we need that increase in price to make up for that difference. But going forward, we're still going to have that same issue probably in 23 as well. So that's where we're looking right now.
You mentioned last year you had issues with parts availability or machinery availability. I know that I have talked to farmers from around the country. I talked to a farmer in Arkansas who said, I needed a tire for a tractor. There was one in Illinois. He had multiple. I bought them all. How are you prepping to make it through planting, growing, and then harvest season, knowing that there are these hiccups?
Sure.
In being able to source products and parts and machinery?
I think farmers have had to, adapt and become more self-sustainable. I think we've got to have the parts on hand that we think that we might run out of. We've got to have, tools to be able to fix some of these things. So really being less reliant on retailers and suppliers and kind of relying on having our own stock is a major thing we've done on our farm.
Yeah, we've kind of done the same thing. We've looked at the critical parts that that would break us down for days, if not weeks. And we've tried to get those on the place. We've talked to some of our retailers to make sure that the dealerships have parts, and I think in general they have a better stock of parts this year because they've tried all year to pull parts ahead. Because last year, kind of the same thing. We had an air screen go out on a combine last fall, and there were two. One was in western Iowa, 6 hours away, and one was in southern Illinois that was 7 hours away. We got in a pickup and went and got it, but things like that, shut us down.
Yeah, we had a similar incident. We had a gearbox for our grain cart, and I'm pretty sure we bought the last one in America. Mm-hmm. It's what we were told. So it was all the way out in Nebraska, which is quite a hike from Virginia. So we definitely tracking down that kind of equipment is tough. I think one of the key things is communication with some of our suppliers and knowing what they probably are going to be on hand and what's going to be tight is going to be the best thing. So communication, I think, is key.
We talked about prices for inputs, but I mean, even input availability. How much of your inputs do you have on your property at this point? How much are you going to have to wait on?
We've got the seed should be delivered this week, I hope. I haven't heard otherwise, but I think it's showing up in the shed this week. The herbicides are booked, and then they're in our wholesaler's shed. Fertilizer, we need a little bit of dry P&K for the spring, supposedly in our retailer's shed, so it gives me a little bit of comfort knowing those things are there. We can at least get a crop in the ground. It's getting it through the rest of the season that's going to be the challenge.
Nick?
We've received a decent amount of our chemicals in. We're still waiting on some fertilizer, but again, moving forward, I think in years to come, we're putting in additional storage for things like fertilizer so we can have it on hand.
That was my follow-up question. Does it change your plans for the future?
We are, as like I said, a young farmer. I think you got to look at being more self-sustainable, and so being able to have that storage on hand for things like fertilizer and seed. We're planning to build out some of that. It's definitely in my plans. So, yeah.
We talk about getting product to us. We talk about being able to export our product. You can't do either of those things without infrastructure. As you look at the importance of infrastructure, we have seen the announcements and the investments of infrastructure. How critical is that to soybean farmers across America in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
It's extremely critical, especially for soybean farmers. We export so much of our product, either as whole beans or meal, that getting that first 10 to 20 miles to the elevator and the last 10 to 20 miles to the export facility has been always been a challenge. So the passing of the infrastructure bill gives us some funding to upgrade some of the locks and dams that are critical to the business in the Midwest, because a lot of our soybeans go down the river to New Orleans, where we're at, and overseas. But we also have to look at roads and bridges too. We have an issue with roads and bridges in the Midwest that we have to route around bridges because of poor conditions or weight restrictions, things like that. So there's a lot of money could be spent.
Nick, talk to me about the infrastructure aspect in your part of the country. I'm pretty familiar with the middle of the country, but I'm not necessarily on the eastern side of the
I was gonna mention we're a little different. We don't deal with barges and locks and dams. We're mostly rail trucks and we're a little bit of rail and mostly truck transport. But we're also a lot of it goes to the port of. Ours particularly goes to the Port of Chesapeake, and having the right resources in place at ports and continue to build those out is going to help, I think, domestically and internationally. So that's what we kind of put an emphasis on the East Coast.
Competition for in the global markets it is incredible. Transportation has always given the U.S. a little bit of a leg up. How critical is it as we're looking at this infrastructure bill that was passed and future infrastructure and investments in locks and dams on our river system to be able to keep us keep that competitive advantage for us?
Yeah, we continue to have to reinvest in those infrastructures, because if we lose those, we lose that competitive advantage that we have now. Right now, it's cheaper to get a soybean from me to China than it is from Brazil to China, and we lose that. We lose our edge in that marketplace, and it just makes it harder to move soybeans from the U.S. out. But the infrastructure that we have built out in the U.S. is second to none, and we need to maintain that advantage.
2023 Farm Bill, not that far away. Those discussions are already starting. Nick, as you look ahead to Farm Bill planning and Farm Bill policy priorities, what's at the top of your list?
I think probably some of the Title I programs and some of these safety nets are important, especially young producers like myself. Different considerations with base and all. It's kind of important to a young producer like myself, but I think there's a lot of things that are going to be coming up in the next year or so.
Dave?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. Was Title I programs provide a safety net for us that put support in when things get tricky for us. It needs to be updated a little bit. So we're talking about reference price, we're talking about base acres, we're talking about the PLC and ARC programs. All those things are on the table, I think, as ASA priorities, and as we're talking to our federal legislators. We need to make sure that those stay as strong as they are in the bill, and maybe update a few things in it.
You heard from the Secretary of Agriculture this morning during the general session. Talk to me a little bit about maybe some of your takeaways in terms of policy and the outlook for agriculture and farming moving ahead.
It was encouraging to hear him talk about investing in domestic fertilizer production. I think that's been lacking, and we've let a lot of that move offshore. I think we need to bring that back and have a little better domestic supply of those inputs. Less reliant on foreign countries and that supply chain issue that we talked about earlier. So if we have it here, it's a little easier to get. So.
I'd agree with that. Also, appreciate his point on continuing to develop diversified international markets. I think that's going to be extremely crucial going forward. So that was one thing that really hit home for me.
Where would we talk about the trade aspect? I mean, in bringing that up, diversifying those markets, did that kind of get an extra emphasis after struggling following the China trade kerfuffle?
I would say so. Talking about the different ways to market our grain and move grain on the East Coast, we actually do a lot of containerizing soybeans and shipping it over instead of barges. So a lot of our production has potential to go to some of these smaller countries that they can't quite handle the large ships, and so obviously not being reliant on one major player and being able to diversify, I think is a huge benefit to us going forward.
Yeah, just diversifying your customer base is smart business sense. We took that as an opportunity to redouble efforts in certain parts of the world, like the Middle East and North Africa, Southeast Asia, and I think we're seeing some rewards from those efforts. We just need to keep that up so we have a continued diversified customer base.
2022 planting season is not that far away. As you look ahead to, as we wrap up today, as you look ahead to this coming year, Nick, what are some things that you're thinking about as you're finalizing things and getting ready to go?
I think, like I said, we're still hoping that we'll have all the supply that we need as pre-planting, also going into the growing season. Maybe a more stabilized market. We're hoping that we see some calmness in the market, and those are kind of top of mind for me right now. So.
Dave?
Yeah, market volatility is probably top of mind for me. I mean, we get up and I probably watch the markets more now than I ever have, and we're trying to find that spot where it's time to market more grain. So we're doing that. But we're also trying a lot of new things on the farm too, in terms of fertilizer efficiency placement. If fertilizer is going to stay high, the cost is going to stay high like it is. We're trying to find ways to to use it more efficiently and hopefully save some dollars there.
It really is gearing up to be an interesting year, or continuing an interesting string of couple of years. Any potential shift in acres for you as you think about maybe inputs or markets as well?
We're pretty much 50-50 split, and the profitability in corn and soybeans in our operation is pretty equal. So there's really no impetus for us to move to one crop or the other. But we always leave that kind of on the table. There's acres that we could shift if we see a spike in price in one commodity over the other. But we're typically a 50-50 split, and I don't see any reason to move away from that right now.
Nick?
On our operation in particular, we're probably staying pretty close to same crop rotation. I have heard other growers in the state of Virginia that are talking about maybe switching a little bit to maybe more of a cotton and peanut rotation as different potentials. But we're staying the course for now. So we'll see.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this afternoon and sharing your thoughts and your experience. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nick Moody from Virginia and Dave Walton from Iowa. I'm Meghan Grebner for Brownfield.